Okay, so Iverson is here, but we're going to we're going to start with book one. Probably today we're going to talk about books 1 and 9. And I do skip around a lot, so the Iliad is much longer than this. But if you're interested not only in the Iliad but in the Trojan War, what I do suggest is, and one reason I opened up this other window is in the Ancient World Literature folder. There are supplementary videos for Unit 1, and there is actually an Iliad overview. And the Iliad overview kind of talks about kind of how the whole thing happened too. It's not just about the Iliad itself, but it's about the Trojan War. And you can find more information too about how the Trojan War started and what happened. But the truth is there's the Iliad itself covers part of the last year of the Trojan War. And I guess I want you to keep that in mind as we go through so that um, you know that what we're doing. I'm just going to keep moving through here and get to the right place because I want to make sure that you can see that there's more to it than the story itself. Now, this is kind of like, I mean, this is an epic poem, and it's the Odyssey. If you've, I don't know if you've read that, Iverson, or ever read the parts of the Iliad before, but both are kind of dealing with the Trojan War, but both are also Greek epics. And epic poems are really very long poems, almost like the length of, I mean, I can't say it's quite a novel, but it's close. But they're unique too in that they were all originally in poetic text. So were they rhyming? No, but they were in verse form and they were memorized. So most people at this time, especially women and slaves and servants, were illiterate. They couldn't read, they couldn't write. They if you gave them a book, they wouldn't know what to do with it. And so people would essentially memorize these full texts, like, and in fact they were memorized orally for hundreds of years before they were ever written down. So this was originally, we know, at least we assume it was somewhere around 800 BCE, which is about, I mean, we're in 2024, so that's about 2824 years ago, because BCE is before the Common Era. So it kind of counts upwards. So it's 800 years before the years switched over, is essentially how we date things. And so this was written, but this was probably passed around orally and recited by poets for hundreds of years before it was ever written down by this weird figure Homer, who we really don't know who he was. But that oral translation, essentially they would go to, you'd go to a big dinner or something, and someone would recite a chapter of the Iliad. But the truth is everybody there knew the story. This was it's almost like, if I say the Three Little Pigs and the wolf, you guys know it, you know exactly what the story means. If I say Little Red Riding Hood, you know what that story is. If I say Cinderella, you know what that story is. We have stories in our culture. Even if I talk about George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or so, we have famous people that we just know a lot about, even though it's not like I ever read a biography of Abraham Lincoln. I just know a lot about the Civil War. I know a lot about his presidency. I know that he was assassinated. I've even been to the theater where he was shot, And so for the Greeks, the Trojan War was one of those, everybody knows all about it. And so this is really, I mean, it's one of the few real written poetic records we have of any part of the war. But the war was bloody. It was, I mean, it was all fought on land pretty much right around the walls of Troy. Troy was like a lot of cities at this time, and so it would have some sort of high walls all around it to protect it with some big gate. And Troy was in some ways impregnable. So what started the war? Well, um, Paris, one of the sons of Troy, one of the sons of um, Priam, the king of Troy, supposedly was like, he kind of was the judge of the very first beauty contest, and that was between three goddesses, and that they were Hera and Aphrodite and Athena. Aphrodite was the queen of, well, she's essentially the goddess of love, or your romantic love or lust or something like that. And then Hera was the goddess of marriage. She was married to Zeus. And then Athena was is the goddess of war and wisdom. And so all three of them wanted to be the fairest, they wanted to win the contest. And Aphrodite won it. And she won it because she bribed Paris with a gift. All of them bribed him, but the gift he liked the best was hers. And that was that she promised him the most beautiful woman in the world, who was Helen. She was considered to be and she actually ended up being the face that launched 1,000 ships. I'm going to put that in here. That's an expression I certainly heard when I was younger, and it's from this. So essentially what happened is all these men wanted to marry her, and they all signed a form saying that they'd go to war and would protect whoever was picked as the husband, because like literally 1,000 people wanted to marry her. And they all signed this little form. Then she was given to Menelaus. He's one of the generals in here. He's actually the king of Crete. And then Paris is essentially led by Aphrodite to Menelaus's palace. He stays the night and then he runs away. We don't know if he kidnaps her or if she goes willingly, but Paris takes Helen to Troy and hides out with his dad. And so because of that, all of these Greeks who signed this form have to go to war and go get Helen and bring her back to Menelaus. And so there are two brothers who are kind of in charge. One of them is Menelaus, and the other one is Agamemnon. And Agamemnon figures in this more than anything. So both of them are sons of Atreus. Agamemnon, though, is the general over all of the Greek armies. And so, and it's really important because Agamemnon he's in charge, so he's the one who makes all the decisions. And that is a problem because Agamemnon is selfish. He's kind of a pig-headed dude. He's not very nice. And there are certain people that he already has differences with, and one of them is Achilles. Now, Achilles is probably most famous because of the Achilles heel, right? And so his mom is a goddess too. He's a demigod if you want to think of it. But that just means he's like taller than other people, stronger than other people. And then to protect him, because he was fated, essentially his fate was to die if he went and fought in the Trojan War. His mom dipped him into the river Styx, which is the river outside of Hades. And supposedly his entire body is impregnable except for his Achilles heel, the little heel on one foot. And that's where we get the word Achilles tendon too, because we have an Achilles tendon. That's an anatomical thing. So, but Achilles was supposed to be impregnable. You could throw you could hit him with a sword, you could throw a javelin at him, you could stab him, and it wouldn't work unless you stabbed him in the heel. So Achilles was already a pretty famous hero. He was pulled into this. He was actually not somebody who wanted to marry Helen, but he was pulled into the war anyway because he was the best fighter ever. But Agamemnon actually tricked him and tricked his own wife. Agamemnon tricked his own wife and essentially claimed that Achilles was going to marry one of his daughters. And so Agamemnon didn't get to marry Helen. He married her sister, Clytemnestra, which is a totally different word. Clytemnestra. And she was not as pretty as Helen, so I think he was kind of resenting that anyway. But he essentially told Clytemnestra, bring our daughter and she can marry Achilles. Well, he didn't bother telling Achilles that, never told Achilles anything. Achilles had no idea what was even going on. And he intended actually to sacrifice his daughter so that the army could take off for Troy and be successful. And Clytemnestra about lost it because she didn't want her own daughter to be executed. And so, but from the beginning of this, Achilles didn't like Agamemnon. They had major differences, mostly because Agamemnon was a big jerk. Well, here he's being a jerk again. And this starts out the whole thing. Although this is set during the Trojan War, it's really not about the Trojan War. It's about, I mean, a lot of battles happen, though we're going to skip a lot of those. What I'm really having us focus on, though, is that difference, that unrest and the division between Achilles and Agamemnon. And it's Agamemnon's fault at first, but Achilles kind of has a bad temper. And so he makes it drag on for longer than it should. But at the very beginning, it even says, this is what we're going to talk about. And it even says we're going to start essentially on the day that when Agamemnon and Achilles fell out with one another. So the day they started fighting during the war. So they'd already been at war for like 9 years. And it really wasn't, um, it wasn't, they say it was caused by a god because the Greeks tended to think everything was caused by a god. But in reality, it was because of what Agamemnon did to tick off a god. And Agamemnon ticked off a lot of gods because he was kind of a stubborn dude. But there is a difference between Agamemnon and Achilles and what happens. So let's kind of go through what really is going on. So essentially, because Agamemnon is in charge, the armies go out. They're trying to get into Troy, but they can't because of the walls. So they attack other outlying, towns, and they've sacked a town. And then Agamemnon, his job as the leader of the whole group is to dish out who's, essentially reward the people who fought the best. And so he passed out rewards. He gave, most of the rewards were women, were slaves that were captured from the town. And so he gave Achilles Briseis, and I'll just put her as a slave. In some translations, and it's a little unclear in the original Greek, but in some translations, he actually marries Briseis. So he's unmarried when this is going on. And so rather than keeping her just as a slave, she becomes his wife. But and then Agamemnon, even though he is married, he takes his own slave, and her name is Chryseis. And her father is Chryses, who's named right here. And Chryses is a priest of Apollo. Now, once a person is taken as a slave, you think, okay, well, they're slaves. Well, no, they're not. If their relatives can bring up money and pay for them, they can be returned. And so what happens is Chryses, who is a priest of Apollo, one of the gods, he came to the Achaeans, he came to the Greeks. That's Achaeans is just another word for the Greeks. And he essentially said, I have money and I want to buy my daughter back, Chryseis. And he, of course, would have bought it from Agamemnon. So he even brought a great ransom. So he brought a lot of money and pled with Achilles, with Agamemnon, and said, could I please have my daughter back? And he says, I've got money. And he even said, okay, I have a little clout too, because I'm a priest of Apollo. Can you please free my daughter and accept a ransom for her? Okay. And Agamemnon doesn't want to, because Agamemnon already gave out all the slaves and he doesn't want to give up his own slave. He's like, he calls him an old man, which is totally rude. He's breaking all the rules. And he says, let me not find you tarrying about our ships. Don't come back here. He even says, he goes, I don't care what God you serve, which is totally bad. And he says, I'm not going to let her go. And when I go home, I'm going to take her with me. She's going to stay my slave for the rest of her life. And Chryseis, he actually chases Chryses off, the priest. But then what does the priest do? Well, he prays to Apollo and says, please, Apollo, please, help me get my daughter back. Strike them down if you have to, but make it, essentially let your arrows avenge my tears upon the Danaans. That's yet another word for the Greeks. And so Apollo, and like a lot of gods, he gets mad. And Apollo actually, he and Artemis she's the goddess of the hunt. They both have arrows. Artemis's arrows kill people, but they kill them painlessly. Apollo's arrows kill people and they die horrible deaths. They're painful deaths. And so Apollo, in vengeance, because his priest was treated so shabbily, he comes and starts killing people on the Greek side. And first he killed their mules and their dogs, but then he started killing the people because Agamemnon won't relent. So for 9 days, he's killing people. And then Achilles actually calls an assembly and he goes, okay, we have to do something because people are dying. And so he specifically addresses Agamemnon and says, we would have this taken care of. We would not all be dying. All this stuff wouldn't be happening if we knew why. And so what he essentially says, we need to ask somebody, some priest or prophet, kind of like with the oracle at Delphi, which is actually Apollo's oracle. But we need to find out why Apollo's angry at us. Is it something, is some vow that we broke? Is it something we didn't, some sacrifice we didn't offer him? Did we do or say something that made him mad? And Calchas, who is a seer, he's like Tiresias. He can actually see the future, can see the present, and all that stuff. And he says to the whole group, he goes, you asked me why Apollo's angry, and I can tell you. But first, you have to protect me because he's afraid if he says the truth, kind of like Tiresias was afraid to say the truth about what was going on with Oedipus. He's afraid. He says, I need you to swear that you'll stand by me heartily in word and deed, for I'm going to offend one of the leaders. He says, there's no way I can stand up against the anger of this king. And even if he doesn't show his displeasure now, he's going to get revenge on me if you don't protect me. And Achilles says, no, totally. I'll absolutely protect you. Speak with the truth, and I'll absolutely protect you from whoever. And he says, even if you name Agamemnon himself, I'll protect you from him. And of course, he's going to say Agamemnon because Agamemnon's the problem. And he says, okay, he goes, the god, Apollo is angry because Agamemnon dishonored him. The priest came to get his daughter back, and he wouldn't give him, and insulted him and chased him out of the place. And he says, the only way that this pestilence is going to end is if Agamemnon gives the girl back without a fee or ransom. So remember, Agamemnon was offered this huge ransom. He said no. And he actually, checked the guy out of camp. And he says, no, now the guy's going to come back. Agamemnon better give his daughter to him. And he can't take any money for it because he's a big jerk. And then Apollo will be happy. Now, Agamemnon hears all of this and he is ticked. He's like, why is it my fault? And he starts to blame Calchas. He goes, like, first of all you ever see is evil. Everything you prophesy is bad, and you hate me, but you just love to say bad things about me. And so he's insulting Calchas instead of, taking, the truth is he's done bad stuff. And he goes, now you say that Apollo plagues us because I wouldn't take ransom for the girl, but I want to keep her. I don't want to give her up. I like her better than my own wife. This is true. He said this. I love her better even than my own wife, Clytemnestra. And he goes, but okay, fine. I'll give her up if I have to. Because I don't want more people to die. But I need a prize to replace her. So I shouldn't have to go without a slave. If I really like Chryseis, I shouldn't have to go without her. I should be able to still have a slave. Otherwise, I alone among the Argives will be without one. So he's all sad. He's like, well, everybody else gets a slave, but not me. I obviously don't like Agamemnon. And Achilles says, look, how are we going to find you another prize? You gave out all the prizes. You can't just take somebody else's prize away because you still want a slave. Just give her up. And then when we sack Troy, you can have all sorts of slaves. And Agamemnon is ticked still. Of course, now he's mad at Achilles. Achilles stands up for Calchas and he says, oh, no, you're not in charge. You shall not overreach and you shall not persuade me. Are you to keep your own prize while I sit tamely under my loss and give up the girl at your bidding? He goes, no, no, no. He goes, if I have to give up Chryseis, I'll take your slave. And he goes, but fine. Let's go ahead, send Chryseis off, but I'm going to get the slave I want. And Achilles is like, really? He says, all you care about is what you get. You're such a selfish person. And he is. Achilles is absolutely right. And he goes, why should any of us do your bidding if you're not going to even leave us with the gifts we have? He goes, I don't have any quarrel with the Trojans. I'm only here because you've given me no choice. But the Trojans haven't done anything to me. You have. He says, I don't have any quarrel with the Trojans. They haven't raided my cattle. They haven't cut down my harvest. They haven't done anything to me. And he says, we've followed you and done what you said just to serve you guys. And yet you treat us like dirt. And then he's mad. He's like, you're going to take my slave. You're going to rob me of the prize for which I have toiled. So I went and earned her, and you gave her to me because I fought so hard, and now you're going to take her back because you're selfish. And he says, when the sharing comes, your share is far the largest. Like, you give yourself the most stuff. And I get whatever you offer me, but you're willing to take it back? That's ridiculous. And Agamemnon, so he fights Agamemnon. Agamemnon, of course, just gets more angry. And he goes, fine. He goes, I'm not going to beg you to stay. I have others here who will do me honor. And he says, there's no king here so hateful to me as you are. Like, it's all your fault, Achilles. Everybody else is nice to me, but you? He goes, are you really that brave, or were you just made that way by heaven? He goes, go home. Go home, like home. Go home back to your island of, your Greek city state. And I don't care. I don't care if you do. I don't care. I don't want your anger. He goes, I'll be fine. We'll be fine without you. And he says, but let me tell you what I'm going to do. Because Apollo took Chryseis away from me, I'm going to go ahead and send her off to her father, but I'm going to come to your tent and I'm going to take your own prize. And then you can learn, first of all, how powerful I am. And then you get to feel the pain that I was going to feel because you get to lose your slave. And Achilles is like ready to kill him. He's so angry. And he was divided. It says within his breast was divided whether to draw his sword and kill the son of Atreus or to restrain himself. Literally, he's thinking, okay, do I kill Agamemnon right in front of everybody, or do I hold back? Like, he was that angry. And yet Minerva, now this is actually Athena. So Minerva is just the Roman name. Why they are using the Roman names in this translation, I don't know. But it's the goddess of war and wisdom. But Athena actually comes down and actually pulls him back by his hair. So Achilles is thinking, okay, I'm going to draw my sword and I'm just going to kill Agamemnon. And she essentially appears behind him and holds him back by the hair and just kind of whispers to him. And nobody else can see her. Only Achilles knows that she's there. And he knows instantly that it's Athena. And she says, let me tell you, she says, she's like stopping him. Like, he knows that she's telling him, don't do anything. And he asks her, he goes, so why are you here? He goes, oh, you want to see the pride of Agamemnon? He goes, let me tell you, he's going to pay for his insolence with his life. So he says that. He tells her, I'm going to kill him. And she says, no, I bid you stay your anger. Juno has sent me. That's Hera, the goddess of marriage. And both Hera and Athena are on the side of the Greeks because they weren't picked. Paris took the other bride and took the girl, and so they're on the Greek side. They're actually and Athena she's actually the goddess who kind of guides Odysseus home in the Odyssey, because they're like super bestie friends, because Odysseus is kind of a smart dude and Minerva really likes smart people. So she says, though, she goes, no, she cares for both of you because you're both Greek, kings. She goes, don't fight anymore. Don't draw your sword. You can yell at him all you want. And you're going to get gifts in exchange for all that you suffer. But obey us in this. Don't fight. And he obeys her. This is what's different. See, Agamemnon was told, hey, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. And he said, forget that. And he didn't start obeying until people started dying. But Achilles listens. And so even though he's really, really ticked, he listens to the goddesses. He doesn't strike out at Agamemnon with his sword and try to kill him or anything like that. And he even says, however angry a man may be, he must do as you command him. So I am going to obey the gods. And this is going to be a theme all the way through this, because Achilles, even though he has tremendous anger and he really is offended and all this other stuff, and he spends a lot of time in the book not fighting because of his anger, if the gods tell him to do something, he does it. And so he stays his hand, doesn't fight Agamemnon, and he kind of backs off. So essentially, all of this fight starts though because of, he still lashes out at him. They still have these words. But remember, Achilles was asked to protect Calchas, when Calchas said, hey, it's because Agamemnon did what he did. And Achilles instead says, okay, fine. I'm not going to do anything because the goddess has told me not to. But I can tell you right now, I'm not going to fight for you anymore. So you can treat people as bad as you want, but guess what? You've insulted me, and I'm not going to fight for you. And then Nestor, another guy, he's kind of an older guy. He's like, now come on, let's everybody calm down. He goes, absolutely, there's a fault in this. We got to make sure and not offend Apollo and all this other stuff. And he tells a lot of history, but he says, Agamemnon, go ahead and give up you've already agreed to give up a slave. Great. But then he says to Agamemnon, and it's great advice, though you are strong enough to do so, though you have the authority, don't take the girl away from Achilles. Don't take Briseis back. And that's only going to offend him. And then he tells to Achilles, now don't buck up against Agamemnon. Don't fight him, because he has more authority than you. Agamemnon is stronger than you, and he has more people under him. So everybody, Agamemnon, calm down, Achilles, calm down, and let's all be okay. Now Agamemnon just gets more angry. He goes, yeah, you're saying the truth and everything, but I'm supposed to get more respect. And so he says, look, he goes, maybe, I am supposed to be in charge, and yet Achilles can't seem to expect that. Can't seem to respect that. So he says, oh, he thinks he's such a great warrior, and that means he can just yell at me. And then Achilles, so they're just back and forth, angry. And then finally the whole group breaks up, and the son of Peleus is Achilles. A lot of them they didn't really have last names. And it's funny because today we have a lot of people with last names that are like, Jacobson and Davidson. And those are all actually from the Anglo-Saxon typical names, where people would put, they'd say somebody's son of David. And so this just became somebody Davidson, And so Achilles was almost always going to be Achilles, son of Peleus. And Agamemnon and Menelaus are both sons of Atreus. And so, because Menelaus and Agamemnon are brothers. But everything breaks up. Agamemnon actually does get a little ship, puts Chryseis on board, and even puts a sacrifice for Apollo on board. And Ulysses is Odysseus. And then Odysseus takes on the slave and goes and returns her to her daughter. Okay. So everything they're trying to do, all the things that the god said to do to make up for what he did. But then Agamemnon, remember, he threatened Achilles, and he makes good on his threat. He sends some people, and he says, go to the tent of Achilles, take Briseis by the hand and bring her hither. If he will not give her, I shall come with others and take her. So in other words, if he doesn't give her up, I'm going to take her by force. And he makes good his threat. He threatened to do it, and he's going to do it. Now, what's going to happen? Of course, now Achilles, they find him back at his tent with all his people. And the people are the guys who've been sent to go get Briseis are kind of scared of him because he's super awesome. He's the most formidable warrior they have. And Achilles is actually really okay to them. He doesn't treat them with any anger. He says, my quarrel is not with you, but with Agamemnon. And he knows why they sent him, why he sent these people. And he tells Patroclus, his bestie friend. Patroclus really is his buddy. They've known each other since they were kids. And he says, Patroclus, go get her. But let them be witnesses that if ever again there be need of me to save the people from ruin, they shall seek and they shall not find. In other words, okay, I'm giving up Briseis, but this is my vow. I will not fight for the Greeks again. Agamemnon is mad with rage and knows not how to look before and after. Essentially, he's not thinking what's going to happen as a result of his actions. And he doesn't realize what he's doing. He doesn't realize the harm he's creating by making it so that I'm so angry, I'm not going to fight for you guys. Patroclus goes and gets Briseis, and she doesn't want to leave. So here she is, she's a slave. That's one reason a lot of people, even there are times some translations even call her, based upon some of the Greek words, his bride. And so if he's actually married to her, it's even worse what Agamemnon's done. But even if he isn't, he obviously really liked her. She liked him, and she didn't want to leave. And now she's over, she's going to be taken to Agamemnon as his slave. And so what does Achilles do? He goes straight to the sea, and he actually prays to his mom, Thetis. She's a water goddess. I'm just going to put her in here. I think it's her name doesn't change to the Roman. So, but he says he essentially cries to his mom, hey, guess what this big bad Agamemnon did? He's robbed me of my prize by force, and he starts crying. He actually cries a lot in this epic poem, which I think to the Greeks was not very unmanly. Like they believed that men could have emotions, and so they don't have an issue with the fact that Achilles is actually not very old either. Some estimates put him at the beginning of the war that he was probably 15 or 16 years old at the beginning of the war. So he's probably only 24, 25 years old at this point. He's still really young. And he really hasn't done anything but be at war, throughout adulthood. But he weeps. Thetis does come to him, and she says, why are you weeping? Tell me what happened. And of course he, talks about the fact that what happened to Chryseis, and he kind of now all of this repetition too, of course, this is an oral poem originally. So people who were listening to it, that would have just reinforced the events that had happened. But essentially he says, look, because Agamemnon had to give back Chryseis, he took my person. He has just taken from my tent the daughter of Briseis, whom the Achaeans have awarded. So in other words, she was mine, and now he took her. And so I'm really sad. And she's like, oh, and she actually cries. She's like, oh, that's so sad. And she's like, but she doesn't really want him to fight. So he says, I'm not going to fight. And she's actually pretty happy about it because she doesn't want him to fight. But she does say she's going to go and talk to Jove, which is Zeus, the king of the gods, and beg him, essentially she's going to complain to him and say, look what the Greeks are doing. And in fact, what she does is she goes and pleads with Zeus, and Zeus says, okay, well, let's make it so that the Trojans start winning. And the Trojans start winning the war. Like the fact that Achilles isn't fighting has more of an effect than even he thought it would have, because Zeus is helping out the other side. And so he goes, don't worry. He went to go visit another place, but as soon as he comes back, I'll talk to him. And I bet I can convince him to help the Trojans out so that the Greeks look bad. And so Chryseis is given back. And that's, I mean, it's important to know that, but it's not as important as some of the other stuff that happens. But they give the Apollo does hear the prayers that they give, does accept the sacrifice. Chryseis is given to Chryses, to her dad, and there's no money that's exchanged. So all the things are done the way that they wanted. And so once that's happened, of course, Apollo's like, okay, we're good, and he stops killing people. But Achilles is the only one. So everything's hunky dory except Achilles is still mad because again, his prize was taken away from him. And so everybody, they go off to fight, but he's not going, and he's staying home. So all the Greeks go back to to battle the Trojans, but he doesn't go. After 12 days, then Thetis actually goes. She knows that Zeus is due to be back at Mount Olympus. And so she goes, she seizes his knees. This is a form of supplication where you're pleading with somebody. And then she catches him under his chin. It's where she kind of reaches up and puts her hand under his chin. It's actually, that's the common, I mean, it's used a lot in both of the epic poems. But then she goes, you need to help me. If you honor me and you have any respect for me and any love for me, and please honor my son. And Achilles is already fated to die in the war, and that's what she's afraid of. And he does actually eventually die. It's really awful, actually, how he dies. But she's asking him, because he's already going to die in this war. Honor him now, though, and help the Trojans. Grant victory to the Trojans until the Greeks essentially decide, hey, what we did to Achilles is wrong. And he's troubled, and he says, that's really sad. He goes, but if I pick the side of the Trojans, even though I'm kind of leaning in that direction, my wife's going to be mad, because remember, his wife is Hera, Juno, and she's on the side of the Greeks. And they actually have several chapters where one chapter she actually puts Zeus to sleep, and then the Greeks have a heyday on the field because Zeus isn't protecting the Trojans. And so literally the gods influence much of what happens. But Jove says, okay, I understand. He goes, I'm going to try to do what I can. He goes, I can help some, but I have to do it quietly. But I'm inclining my head because and yes, I'll help you out. And then Juno sees the whole thing, and she's like, he's going to take the Trojan side. So even though he tries to hide it, he's kind of scared of his own wife. She knows what's really going on. And she even says, she goes, you're always settling matters in secret behind my back, and yet have never told me if you could help it one word of your intentions. Like, I don't know what you're planning, but you're planning something. And he's like, oh, don't expect me to tell you everything. You're my wife, but you wouldn't understand them. So he's kind of dismissing her questions, and she's mad. And she's like, what? Me asking questions? Never. She goes, I always give you your own way, which is totally a lie. They don't have the best relationship, but it's actually kind of funny that they're bickering about this. But he finally tells her, so she insists, and he says, look, you can suspect me, but if you try to nose your way into my business, I'm going to get mad. I shall only dislike you the more, and it will go harder with you. And only when he's kind of puts his foot down does she get afraid. So when he actually stands up for himself, this makes her a little freaked out, so she backs away. And then Vulcan, who is actually, his Greek name is Hephaestus. He's the person who makes all the really fancy armor, and he's actually going to make armor for Achilles later on. But he goes, don't start fighting. He's their only kid, Hephaestus is, or Vulcan. He's the only kid of Jove and Juno, or Zeus and Hera. And so he's just like, stop fighting, y'all. And he even says, cheer up. Like, and of course now Juno's all happy. She's like, okay, we'll be okay. But remember, Zeus already said he would help. He would actually help the Trojans. So he's still planning on doing that. Okay, so that's book 1. Now book 9 is our next one. And hopefully you guys don't have too much of a problem. Do you have any questions so far, Iverson? Does that all make sense, what I talked about with the first book? So, okay, good. So now we get into book 9, and we of course, what we missed was battle with extra battle. So when students ask me, okay, so which of the 2 epic poems should I read? I always tell them, okay, if you really like lots of action, if you're, like action movies are your big thing with lots of car chases and fighting and whatever, then you want to read the Iliad. If you really like an adventure story where there's a hero who kind of goes through all this stuff and then eventually has a happy ending, then you really want to read the Odyssey. I can't say, I mean, I think the Odyssey, I like it better. Now that's a great question. Percy Jackson, the like the lightning thief, the Percy Jackson in the Olympians, that is absolutely based in only in a modern way with a lot of, poetic license on the Greek gods. Absolutely. Apollo's in there. I think he drives a motorcycle with sunglasses. And there's several gods, and of course Percy Jackson is the son of Poseidon, and that's, or in the Roman terms that would be Neptune. But there's even a Roman version. There's and it's Jason is the other series that's also by the same author. And then there's an Egyptian series, but all 3 of the series are based on actual systems of gods. Yes, so the short answer, the very short answer, Iverson, is yes. That Percy Jackson is absolutely related to these people. So let's see. And a lot of the gods, I mean, Poseidon actually wasn't well known to have had lots of kids with mortals, but Zeus and Apollo very commonly found mortal women that they really liked. And supposedly anytime an immortal, one of the gods or goddesses gets together with a mortal, there has to be a child. Like they're that fruitful or something. So if a woman, even if Zeus takes a woman once, she's going to have a baby. Romulus and Remus are actually, fated. They were supposedly legendary founders of Rome, but they were sons of Mars or Ares, the god of war. And he, they were twin sons, but they, it was the same mortal woman. And so they were actually, she was, because she had had children out of wedlock, she was punished for that, but they were raised by a wolf in the wilderness. And so they had super extra powers because they were half god and they were also raised by wolves. So, but Percy Jackson, remember his mom is mortal, and yet his father, whom he never gets to meet until, somewhere in the middle of the book, he meets, or near the end of the book, really, he meets Poseidon, his dad, who's also an immortal. And Achilles is the same way. He's half god because his mom is Thetis, but his dad is mortal. So it's a rare situation where a man and a goddess get together. So, but anyway, so in the meantime, what has happened is the Greeks have been fighting, but they've been mostly losing. There were a couple of there was a time when Zeus is actually put to sleep, and then Hera goes out with a bunch of the Greek ally gods, and they go and get the Greeks better, but now they're doing bad again. Okay, so the essentially the Greeks and all the generals, Agamemnon, Menelaus, everybody is despairing. They're really thinking, oh my gosh, we're gonna lose. And so it kind of shows how the tide of battle can shift. And yet for the Greeks, that just meant different gods were helping. And so the gods are behind all of it, even if we can't quite see them. Although in this epic poem, the gods are often personified. They're put on the field and they do certain things. So it's kind of like explaining what's going on. And so it's really fascinating to watch. It's very bloody, and again, we're going to read a few of the later books in the second, like that the ones we're reading this week. There are several that have a lot of battle sequences, like with Patroclus, and then with Hector, who's a Trojan warrior. They get pretty bloody and pretty graphic. But for the Greeks, that, it's okay. They didn't want to see it on stage, like in theater, but they would absolutely listen to it. So there's a lot of really, I mean, they describe exactly how people die, and it's pretty gory. So, but anyway, the Greeks are losing. Okay. And that's where we are in this book 9. And um, the sons of Atreus, that's Menelaus and Agamemnon. Remember, they're the ones in charge, Agamemnon mostly, but they essentially put together a council. And he's like, okay, we're in trouble. And Agamemnon even cries. And he's like, dude, we're gonna lose. And we think essentially that the gods are against us. You know, they told me, Zeus said that I would sack the city of Troy before I returned home, but he lied, because we're going to lose a bunch of people and we're going to lose this war. And so let's just go home. That's what he tells him. He says, we're not going to be able to take Troy. So let's just go home. And they're all sad. They're like sitting around going, but, and Diomed, this is actually Diomedes. I don't know why they changed his name, Diomedes. And he actually was one of the times when the Greeks were doing really well. He was given the gift of sight so he could see where the gods were. And he actually stabs Aphrodite, the goddess of love. She's trying to protect one of her people, one of her like own warriors, and he stabs her in the hand because he can see her. And so he's a super brawny, rough and tumble kind of warrior. Probably, even, he's not like the smartest, the sharpest tool in the shed, but he's super brainy, and I mean super brawny. And so he's been quite the warrior in this first half of the book anyway. But he's mad. He's like, really? He goes, you're telling us to go home? He says, in the first place, you said that I was a coward and I wasn't a real soldier. And then of course he proved them all wrong. But then you're the chief of this, but you're supposed to have bravery and valor. Like, you're supposed to be the one who's really like doing the most. And really, you're going to be the coward? If your own mind is set upon going home, go. But I'm staying. The rest of us will stay here till we've sacked Troy. So go ahead and give up. Go be a coward. And so he criticizes Agamemnon for saying, let's just go home. We're never going to sack Troy. And then Nestor, of course, the calming older guy, says, now let's not get all mad. But you're still young. You just don't know yet what's going on. But let me tell you, he says, he even says, he goes, let no man, not even King Agamemnon, disregard what I say, because I know what I'm doing. He says, but he goes, right now, yes, we're not doing so well. Okay. And so he's giving, this is what he says, but let me give you guys some advice and please follow it. He says, first of all, one of the things he goes, don't stop fighting. And even though we're about to lose, because we're in trouble right now, and what that means is that the Trojans have actually moved ground. So they have backed the Greeks up to their own ships. If they get further, if they actually get to the ships, they can set the ships on fire, and then the Greeks will never be able to make it home because they won't have any naval force anymore. They won't literally be able to escape, and they're probably all dead. And he goes, tonight, this night will either be the ruin of our host or it will save us. So we'll either win or lose everything tonight. And so they're all like, man, we're in trouble. And so he says, let's make a feast for the gods. Let's, plan out what we're going to do and everything. And so then Nestor gives more counsel. Okay. So he says, but he kind of prefaces it, and he says, look, I know a lot of times you don't like counsel, you don't like advice, but you need to listen. Therefore, it behooves you above all others both to speak and to give ear, to listen, and essentially listen to the people who are speaking to you wisely. Okay. And then he brings up an issue that's been a canker sore in Agamemnon's mouth for a while. He says, no man will be of a truer mind than that which has been mine from the hour when you, sir, angered Achilles by taking the girl Briseis from his tent. So this is weeks ago. And he says, I told you then, don't you do this, and you're going to pay for it. So now, this is my advice. Let's figure out how we are going to appease Achilles with presents and fair speeches, make him back, bring him back to our side, and get him to fight for us. And Agamemnon says, I admit I was wrong. I own it. I should not have taken Briseis. I was blinded with passion and yielded to my worser mind. So I will make amends. I'll give him some gifts as atonement. And he starts listing out all the riches he's going to give. I'm going to give him more slaves, and I will even give him back the daughter, give him back Briseis. And he swears, he goes, I swear, I've had her. I've had her in my tent for weeks and weeks and weeks. But I swear that a great oath that I never went up into her couch, nor have been with her after the manner of men and women. In other words, I never slept with her. He literally says that in this epic poem, okay? But I had her for weeks and weeks, but I swear I never slept with her. So what I'll do is I'll give back Briseis, give him a bunch of other slaves and all this wealth. Enough wealth that 20 iron cauldrons and 12 strong horses, all this stuff, all this junk. And he goes, I'll do it right now. And then as long as he'll come and fight for us. Okay. And then once we sack Troy, I'll even promise him that he can take 20 Trojan women with him. Anybody as beautiful after Helen as Helen. And then when we get home, I'll give him more honor. And I have 3 daughters. Of course, one of them, remember what he was going to sacrifice. That's the oldest daughter who's gone. Let him take one of his choice as a wife. I'll give him all these cities. He just names all this stuff if he will forego his anger. And so he says, okay, this is what I'm promising. Nestor's like, great, let's do that. And everybody's happy. So they're all, finishing up the eating and everything. And he sends envoys out again. Remember, last time he sent envoys, what did he do? He took Briseis. Now he's willing to give all this stuff back. Okay. And who goes back? But who sent Nestor, the old guy, and then Odysseus, the smart guy, Ulysses. And so they're going to go and try to convince Achilles to fight. So they do. And they actually, and Ajax goes to, Achilles sprang from his seat. He was playing the lyre, little harp. And Patroclus is there too. And they greet him, and he greets them pretty nice, but he goes, even though I've been angry, you guys are still the dearest of the Greeks that the ones I like the most. So these are his friends. And so, and then he offers them wine, does all the sort of things he should do. And then this is when Ulysses starts speaking. So this is, Odysseus. And he says, okay, so we're not doing so well. It's not going so well. But I wondered, could we figure out a way for you to fight for us again? So this is what Agamemnon's offered you. And so he offers all the gifts first. He says, okay, so we're in a pickle. We need your help. The Greeks are losing. And we really need you to say yes. In fact, you're going to repent it. You're going to regret it if you don't say yes now. Okay. Because once the harm is done, there's no way to fix it. So once we're all dead, it's too late. So we need your help now. And then he brings up his dad, but then he brings up all of this wealth. This is what Agamemnon's going to give you. He's going to give you this, going to give you that. And it's all repetition from what he said before. The slaves from Lesbos, the lesbians, which is so funny. That's where you get the word lesbians, but it's from the Isle of Lesbos, where women tended to, men had no power, and women tended to like imprison men and keep them as slaves, which is like reversing the gender roles. That's why we get that word. But he says, he's going to give you this, plus he's going to give you Briseis. And he even said he never slept with her. So he repeats and repeats and repeats, repeats and repeats and repeats all of these things that he's going to get as long as he goes back and fights for us. Please fight for us again. And he says, besides, if you go back and fight, we're going to honor you as a god. You'll earn a lot of glory. You might even kill Hector. Who knows? This is kind of foreshadowing. And Hector's, I know he'd fight you. And Achilles is like, okay, this is really nice and all, and it sounds real pretty, but I hate Agamemnon. I hate him. Him do I hate even as the gates of hell. And he can say all he wants, but he just lies through his teeth. Can't stand the guy. I am all done with Agamemnon. I will not be appeased by him. I will not take any of his riches, any of his promises. I will not deal with him ever again. I don't want to talk to him, blah, 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 blah. And he says, look, I've done all this by myself, and I deserved so much more than he gave me, and he treated me like dirt. So I'm done. And he goes through all of the wrong when he took Briseis and all that stuff. I don't care if I fight Hector. I don't care. I don't care if Hector dies or lives. I just don't care. I don't care about any of this. This is not my war. I was only fighting to be nice, and he's going to treat all he took and everything. The only thing I ever got was one prize up to this point. So all these riches that he's promised me, dude, I didn't, that's nothing to what he's promising me now. Great. But all I wanted was Briseis. That was enough. And he took her. So I'm done. And he says, no, 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 no. In all of this lovely speech, he says, no, I don't need a wife from him. I'm not going to marry one of his daughters. So he kind of turns on its head every single promise that Agamemnon gives him. And he goes, if I stay here and fight, I'm going to die. And if I don't fight, then I can live. So why would I fight for something I don't believe in, for a person I don't even like, to fight for nothing so that I can die young? Why would I do that? And so he has all of the reason in the world to not fight. And then Phoenix, another older knight, says, please, how are we going to fight? How are we going to win without you? They're all pleading with him. And he says why he's come to fight and what he's fighting for and everything. And he says, don't you owe us something? I've always praised you. I've always treated you well, because yeah, Agamemnon's a jerk, but the rest of us are nice people. Can't you help us? Okay. And so he pleads and pleads and pleads. And this is all, they're all wanting him to just, come on, let's go. But Achilles is not going to say yes. Now, why does Achilles, do you remember, Iverson, why does Achilles finally say he's going to fight? What makes it, because he says no. At the end of this book, he's done. He goes, no, I don't need the honor. I don't need to fight. I don't care about Agamemnon. I don't care about any of these people. So I'm not fighting. He lets everybody sleep, spend the night. And then he says, and in the morning, he goes, I see that our journey is in vain. So this is even, Ajax actually talks to Odysseus and says, look, we can stay the night, but he's not going to change his mind. He is going to stay savage and remorseless. He's cruel and cares nothing. Now, why are they so angry? Well, because, okay, he's mad because of Briseis. Well, Briseis is going to be given back to him. And yet he still won't fight. He's too angry. And so what's going to happen if he doesn't fight? All the Greeks are going to die. And they know that. They know that they will not win if they don't have Achilles. And so he goes, Achilles doesn't care about us. We might as well go home. And the truth is no matter what they say, no matter how much Ajax pleads with him, no matter how much Phoenix pleads with him, no matter how much Odysseus pleads with him. Yeah, the original poem is in Greek. I'm not making any, you could read any of the stuff in the original languages, but it's world literature. So we're, this, and the oldest world literature we have actually is Greek. And the next oldest is actually Chinese. So like Lao Tzu and the Taoist stuff, the Tao Te Ching is one of the oldest texts too. We have a lot of other stuff too. Gilgamesh is probably the oldest epic. But it's written in Sanskrit. It's a lot harder to read than, so I, even the translations of it are so hard to make sense of, in my opinion. Um, so, but yeah, this is all translated into English for us, but the original is in Greek. I actually knew somebody. I knew a guy. He was Spanish, but he was a professor in languages, and he could recite these poems in their original Greek. I've never read them in the Greek. I actually don't know Greek, so I've read some of the other works that we'll cover in their original languages, but I can only translate like 3 languages, so I can't. Yeah, we'll always read it in translation. So eventually, I mean, essentially, this ends with them having to leave. They go back to Agamemnon and tell him, "Hey, Achilles says no," and they're all kind of sad. Like they all held their peace, sitting for a long time, silent and dejected. And Diomedes is like, "Well, let's just keep fighting." And they decide they're going to keep fighting anyway, even without Achilles. So we will get to, though, and this is the next. It's actually in this week's reading. We're going to get to the point where Achilles, and it's because of Patroclus. He's the reason that Achilles fights, because Patroclus, even though Achilles is too angry, Patroclus first tries to get Achilles to fight, and then when Achilles won't fight, Patroclus begs him, "Can I please use your armor? Pretend I'm you, but can I go out on the battlefield and see if I can help the Greeks out?" And Achilles allows him to do that. He says, "Okay, fine, borrow my armor, pretend you're me, but don't go very far. Fight just as far enough to help the Greeks out, but then come back so that you're safe." And that's kind of where, and of course, that doesn't turn out so well, but we'll see that as we go through. And then, of course, what you're going to read this week is actually going to be about what Achilles does and him, because he eventually does join the battle, and what happens to Hector. So that's the books that you're going to read this week are the ones covering that side of the battle. But this week so tomorrow, the session that we'll do, we're done with 9. So tomorrow we'll go through 15 and 16. And again, I'll record it just like I did today. Do you have any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.